Good morning, YouTube, BookTube. This is Johnny. This is a Friday Reads. I'm not really sure what I'm going to read today. I thought I would just show you what I'm reading this morning, and I did. There was today is December the 24th. 2021. It's 10:21 in the morning here in West Michigan. It is a cold, foggy, drizzly day. I am, as I am always doing, writing in my diary. I've been doing that since I was, 17 years old. I'm going on 70 years and old, and I just keep writing away. I'm on page 1,300 for the year 2021. And yeah, so I'm having my morning devotions. And I showed you I was reading, I'd alternate between, Yesterday, I didn't get around to reading something. I was reading, wait, hold on here. Wait a minute, I'll be back. Here I am. I was reading, Strudlhof Steps by Heimito, I can't pronounce his name, von Doderer. I was reading this and I kind of gave it a rest. I read almost 237 pages and I'm kind of giving it a rest, and then I decided I showed you this book I got in the mail this week, The Days of the Phoenix, the 1920s, I Remember, von Wyck Brooks. And this is his memoir that was first published, first printing 1957. And I've been reading this in the evenings. It's really, if you really want to know the American literary scene from the 1920s, before 1880s, up until the Civil War, 1860s. This is really, I'm really enjoying this. As you all know, if you watch my videos, I am into American literary history. I tend to be a student of American history, American Christianity, American revival movements, American reform movements, American literary movements. And this book is really good. Van Brooks, he wrote literary biographies on Melville, literary biographies on Walt Whitman. He wrote literary biographies on Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote on Thoreau. He wrote on Henry James. When he was a young man, he lived in Paris and in England. He knew W.B. Yeats. He knew Sinclair Anderson and Theodore Dreiser. He knew all the literary figures of that time. William Dean Howells. He knew. He was just a very. So this is about the time he writes in the 1920s, when he just finished. I think he went to Yale or Harvard, and he became an editor and a. I showed you that Seven Arts literary magazine, and he was an editor of the New Republic. And anyway, Anyway, I've been reading that as a break. But then I mentioned that I had been reading The Ordeal of Mark Twain by Brooks. And someone said, well, what was Mark Twain's ordeal? At first I thought about this is very complicated, but I thought my approach to this, answering this question, what was Mark Twain's ordeal according to von Wyck Brooks, and I thought I'd just be very simple. When you read, well, there's something I came across, a little summary of this book about Mark Twain, the Ordeal of Mark Twain by Brooks. It says here, it took some time for Mark Twain to be recognized as anything more than just another of the humorists of his time. Although from the start there were critics who recognized that he contained depth and substance that would make him last longer than his ethereal comic peers. See, at the time of Mark Twain, there were other humorists or comics that would go throughout the country, and they were called humorists, or you might call them comics. But significantly, William Dean Howells, writing in the influential Atlantic magazine, William Dean Howells, who wrote novels and criticism and essays, and I think he even wrote poetry, was an editor of the Atlantic there in the 19th century, saw in Twain an important writer to be reckoned with. The public were ahead of most critics in their appreciation of his work, and their letters to him bear witness to his power as a writer. In the earliest 20th century, H.L. Mencken was a champion of Twain. Although Twain received the same kind of backlash Howells received at the hands of a younger generation. Notably, Van Wyck Brooks, whose book, 1920 book, The Ordeal of Mark Twain, used crude Freudianism to argue that Twain was a comic genius who was censored and emasculated by William Dean Howells and Mark Twain's wife. In 1932, Bernard de Vito answered Mark Brooks in Mark Twain's America, which I ordered used. Mark Twain's America was a book by Bernard de Vito, who is a very famous American historian also, argued for Twain's artistry and creative vitality. In many ways, their arguments set the tone for Mark Twain criticism, especially in the decades that followed, but continuing today in the 1940s and 1950s, Mark Twain's critical reputation rose with a number of important critics and scholars seeing in him greatness, elevating Mark Twain to the first rank of American writers. So Brooks, in his Ordeal of Mark Twain, kind of says that, just being very simplistic, that Mark Twain, in his life, that he was an artist, that he was going to be a writer. But then he kind of happenstance, through various circumstances, became a journalist, and then through various circumstances he became a humorist. And what that means is that he started giving lectures. First he was a journalist, and then he went to Sandwich Islands, he went to Hawaii, he traveled throughout South America for these newspapers, were journals, and he wrote these reports, were articles, were letters that were sent to the United States. And when he came back to the United States, this is back in the 19th century, I don't know, after the Civil War, to make money, he would give lectures about his travels. To make, because he had to make money. He was he didn't want to starve. So he would go around giving lectures about his travels, and he tended to, and then he realized there was a response in the audience. They started laughing. They found him funny, or his delivery was humorous. So he found himself being, he got all these great reviews in newspapers that he was funny and that he was humorous and he was interesting and he was witty, and he realized that he could make a living doing this. And he did write, so he wrote books, but the point is that his ordeal was, according to Brooks, is that he sold his soul. That's basically it. That instead of being this great writer that Mark Twain thought that he was going to be, or seeking to be, when he was younger, as he got older and got into journalism, and then he became a humorist, and then he became a comic, that he basically, instead of being a true artist, he sold his soul to make money, to be successful, to become famous. And he's, instead of being this great writer that he could have been, his ordeal was that he had to throw all that away, and that he, because at the time that he lived, Mark Twain, a man to be considered successful, if he wanted to have a family and a wife, and to have a home, and be considered not a failure, he had to have money. He had to have success. He had to be able to support a wife and children. And so Mark Twain gave in to society's demands of what a man should be and what success is, was being famous or making a lot of money. And so he chose that. But deep inside, Brooks believes that he was unhappy with that. That it made him depressed, it made him unhappy. So that was his ordeal. That's the ordeal. The ordeal is that every artist, a creative person would face, is, am I going to be an artist, be a writer, be a painter, be a poet, even though it might cost me that I might starve, or am I going to pursue a way of life that will make money and make me successful? And you always have to have that choice, according to Brooks. And so that was the ordeal. And according to Brooks, I could read from the Ordeal of Mark Twain where he says that, but this video would go on forever and ever. So that was the ordeal of Mark Twain in a very sloppy, simplistic way. But it's the same thing that it brings out about von Wyck Brooks in this biography, In Search of American, Van Wyck Brooks, In Search of American Culture by James Hibbs. It seems that to be the same kind of dilemma that Brooks faced in his own life. He wanted to be a writer, he wanted to be a poet, and then he realized, in the environment that he grew up in, that he was expected to be a businessman, he was expected to make money, he was expected to be a breadwinner. His father died, and the people he hung out with, but he wanted to be a writer, he wanted to be an artist. And so that was his own dilemma. What am I going to choose? How can I make a living? How can I have the things of this world and be an artist? And of course, it's very difficult. And he struggled with that as a young man, but he eventually became a literary figure. He, like I said, he became editor of the 7 Arts, and he started writing books and then he taught at colleges and universities. So that's the Ordeal of Mark Twain. I don't know. But I think it's a good book. I really have enjoyed his writings. I recommend Wyck Brooks. I recommend all his books. I think he's a good writer. I mean, I really enjoyed this, the Days of the Phoenix, the 1920s. I Remember by Wyck Brooks. I'm really enjoying this. I read it yesterday. I've been reading. I'll probably read it today. It's really good. If you want to know about the 1920s, what was going on in literary circles, he's very good. If you're interested in that kind of literary history, like I said, I'm into literary history. I like reading about American writers and their biographies and their memoirs and their letters, and that's why I'm reading this too. This is interesting too. I recommend it too. And I recommend reading Mark Twain's books, his autobiography that I showed. And so this morning I'm reading Reformed Systematic Theology, Spirit and Salvation by Joe R. Beeke and Paul M. Smalley, Volume 3. Reading the Bible, writing in my diary, and going through the day. So that's it. My wife went to church to fold church bulletins, and the day will go by. So I just thank you for bearing with that last video. I know it ended abruptly, but I don't like to delete things or edit things. I just want to be spontaneous and real. This video is kind of like how I talk to my wife about books. So it's kind of like me, just conversational, just rambling about the Ordeal of Mark Twain. This book is interesting. This is the only book on YouTube that has the complete audio. Someone read this whole book on YouTube. I don't know why they chose, of all the books that Brooks wrote, they chose on YouTube to have this whole thing read, the Ordeal of Mark Twain. Because he wrote The Life of Emerson, The Pilgrimage of Henry James, Sketches in Criticism. He just wrote all kinds of books. I am showing you all the books. I always look for his books when I'm out in book sales or thrift stores so anyway. So I hope you had a good reading week. Tomorrow I think is Christmas according to the calendar. And thank you for your comments. And then this is Friday Reads. Like I said, I'll probably be reading this again today, The Days of the Phoenix by Brooks. And so I'll sign off. And until next time, bye.